Hi everyone, welcome to my channel and to this time-lapse version of a young girl's portrait in soft pastel. I hope that you enjoy seeing the speedy version of this come together here. I will be releasing a full real-time tutorial series from this over on my Patreon channel if you would like to learn along with me in real time. But as always, if you enjoy this, then please do hit subscribe here on YouTube. For this portrait, I am using the Canson velvet paper. This is 14 by 11 inches. I haven't used this paper for a human portrait until now, and I was keen to try it out because if you've watched any of my recent videos, you'll know that I've been enjoying the Canson velvet paper very much. And I thought from the feel of it that it should be quite good for a human portrait as well. So the first thing I'm doing is just building up a bit of colour in the background. I really went at this background with not much of a plan, as you can see. And the idea was to make use of some of the colours that I was pretty sure I was going to use within the portrait, and to just kind of make something interesting happen in the background. Now, it didn't look so great at this stage, but I decided to work on at the portrait and assess the background a bit later once I would start to see a bit of her face emerge. So the first thing I do, as I do in all of my paintings, is search out some blocks of colour, and the majority of the first colours that I put down will be my darker values. And the way I tend to approach a face, well, a human face anyway, is to find some of the structure first. So to find some of the bigger shapes, some of the bigger planes that I can see on the face. So I try to avoid smaller details right from the beginning, and instead I try to look for the bigger areas that I can get blocked in and start to get a sense of the structures on the face. So I'll avoid things like the eyes until a little bit later when I've got a bit of the structure built up on her face. And a lot of the colours that I put down in the beginning are quite strong so that these will shine through my later layers, because as I start to blend and mix and smooth the transitions between the colours, then they will get toned down a little bit. But I do like to come in with some pretty strong colours, especially as you can see on the left side of the face where we get the most amount of shadow. For me, a human portrait is so different from everything else that I paint. I feel like there is no room for error when I'm trying to capture an exact likeness of someone. And I always seem to get really carried away once I do start adding details. So I've got to keep stepping back from the piece, and I take lots and lots of breaks when I'm working on a human portrait. I'll come back at it with fresh eyes many, many times and try to assess what else needs to happen. The terrible thing about a human portrait, I find, is that the least little millimeter out of place here and there, and you completely lose the likeness of the person. So the very first thing that I actually do before I ever start the final portrait is to sketch the person a little bit. So I spent a bit of time actually with some charcoal, and I did some very rough sketches of her just to try and figure out some of her proportions. None of these turned out particularly fantastic, but I learned a lot about the placement of her eyes, for example, the depth of her forehead, basically all of her proportions. I figured a lot of that out within these little charcoal sketches that I did to begin with. And then when it came to sketching her out for this portrait, I actually gridded out my reference image. So sometimes I'll do that. I'll use a grid to help me scale the proportions to the right size. So to help me increase the size of my sketch to fit this size of paper, and to just make absolutely sure that I get her features in the right place, that I get the overall shape of her face and structure correct. So I'm always happy to make use of a grid if it helps to speed me up in getting the proportions of something. But I also learn a lot from those proprietary drawings that I do when I'm painting a person. Something that I don't really do with any other type of portrait. Of course, I work on a lot of animal portraits, and I just seem to be able to get those a bit quicker. With humans, I always find it a struggle. I always spend way longer on a human face. And as I said, it is just that problem of something gets moved a little millimeter out of place, and all of a sudden it just doesn't look like the person anymore. But I was pretty confident with my initial sketch on this one that I had the placement of her features pretty good. And after that, I just have to trust the process with the soft pastels. You can see that I'm almost sculpting her features, starting with the darker tones and then building up to the brighter highlights. Now, I do make use of quite a lot of pastel pencil when I'm working on a human portrait. And especially around the eyes here, you can see a lot of the detail going on there using the pastel pencils. And I'll even make use of the pastel pencils on many areas of the skin tones. So I'm using the bigger sticks to lay down the pigment. I'm using the sticks on their sides sometimes to add a bigger block of colour in. I'm also making use of a blender here. You can just see that pop up a little as well. That's one of the soft tools with a little sponge applicator on it. And that's great for blending and mixing the pigment on the paper, something I do a lot of in a people portrait. But then with the pencils as well, you can see how then I just come back in and I sculpt a little bit more. I just get the finer details with the pencils mostly. But at this stage, I was pretty pleased with the likeness I was getting, at least in the top half of her face. Of course, I've still got the all-important lips to do. And you can see while I'm making some of these very minor adjustments, especially with the pastel pencils, that I'm often leaning a little bit just to the right of her face there where her hair is. You can see lots of little smudges there where I perhaps use my small finger as an anchor and to just steady my hand while I make some of the smaller adjustments. So with her hair and her t-shirt, I decided to be a little bit more loose with these areas to try and retain the impression that this is actually a painting and it's not photorealistic. So I went pretty detailed on her face and her main features. And then I tried to be just a little bit more suggestive with her hair and the t-shirt, which you'll see at the very end. So with the top half of her face pretty much done now, I've still got that very important smile, her lips to work on. And of course, the whole area around her lips also really affects the lips themselves. So the shadows here over to the left side of her mouth. And again, I'm using the pastel sticks to add most of the pigment to the paper. And then coming in with the pastel pencils to add the details and the bits of highlight. So again, this is another feature where if you just go a little millimeter or even a half millimeter out, it can really lose the likeness so quickly. I also at this stage just want to mention that on camera, in the footage and all of the progress photos that I took of this piece, my transitions between the colours on her face and the light and shade, it all looks a little bit more harsh than it actually does in person. So I hope that you can see from my video everything that I'm doing, but at the same time, I was so aware that the portrait just looks so much nicer, so much softer in person. And I suppose that's the important thing, isn't it? That it will look good on my client's wall. But I did my best with the footage to try and get it to look as close to the real thing as possible. But I do find that sometimes with human portraits especially, the softness just doesn't quite come across on camera. So with her t-shirt, I tried to incorporate all of those lovely background colours that I used, and also to leave it just a little bit more loose and rough. And again, with her hair, I decided to not try to paint absolutely every individual hair, but then I did use a little bit of pastel pencil towards the end, mostly around the edges of her hair, just to hint at all of those little flyaway hairs that we see. But I really tried to not overdo it and to just let the detail on the main part of the portrait, on her face, stand out from the rest. So I was pleased with this one because I felt like I did capture her likeness. I know this lovely little face in person, and I really feel like it does look like her. I'll be adding this to my Patreon tutorials library if you'd like to come and learn along with me in real time. There are already lots of other people portraits in the library. But thanks very much for watching this here, and until next time, happy pasteling.